Hey guys, how we doing today? We're doing jazz legacy albums right now. I'm not sure how many we're gonna do on this series. Uh, it can go on forever, really, but we're trying to cover iconic legacy uh, making albums. If not the artist's most popular, it's certainly one of their most popular records. That Cannibal Adderley Something Else is really a fantastic session, and the Mingus record is also equally of importance. Today we're going to talk about probably the record in jazz. Speaking of legacy, not just Miles Davis, but jazz itself. It's such an iconic piece. And in some ways, what more can you say about it? But it's just such a wonderful, melancholic sound. And weirdly enough, when people discuss cool jazz and West Coast cool, I find a lot of that stuff is really poorly named. I've renamed a lot of it Cool Bop because it's so aggressive and up tempo, and by no means is it just cool. Brubeck is cool. Chico Hamilton's early work is cool, but a lot of that West Coast stuff, Shelly Manne stuff, cooks more than people realize. A lot of that West Coast contemporary Pacific stuff really has a high level of upbeat tempo songs and great playing, and it doesn't have the emotional context of hard bop, but it's cool bop. And so when you're looking to define what the cool is, Birth of the Cool to me is not that cool. Birth of the Cool is kind of almost medieval in its tone at times. It makes me want to drink mead. I mean, it's Gregorian. It's got these weird pastoral, for the lack of a better word, Caucasian soundscapes. Again, that's partly because Mulligan and Conitz and all those other guys were primary, Gil Evans were primary contributors to it, and Miles Davis' name's kind of been attached to it, but he was a part of it, but nothing more. And that's, to me, Birth of the Cool has little to do with Miles Davis in a lot of ways, and it's far from the cool. And if you had to define the cool, if you had to define the sound that the Pink Panther wanted to emulate, it's the coolness of kind of blue. Miles with his muted melancholy, Coltrane with a somewhat bridled enthusiasm, which isn't something you say about Coltrane on a very regular. The entire session, Cannonball Adderley, as we mentioned in the last episode, is working with Miles at this point, providing a wonderful upbeat joyfulness to the lemon meringue I mentioned last time. The dour sourness of Miles. Cannonball's a great, joyful, leaping and bounding. And like my one friend mentioned, he's filled with the blues. Coltrane has that kind of desperation and that seeking, and it's just a real interesting mix of horn players with a very solid rhythm section. Jimmy Cobb, Wynton Kelly, who was often replaced by Bill Evans. And Miles is kind of at this crossroad with the piano players. He has dismissed Garland from missing a practice, put Wynton Kelly on the piano and ended up hiring him and firing Carlin when he showed up. And and then he kind of just replaces Wynton Kelly because he decides he wants to do that George Russell thing, that modal playing. And it's rooted in math and theory, music theory, and it's amazing how much feeling they get out of it on this record. And so Miles was great to adapt this into his sound. He's by no means the innovator of modal playing, which often he gets credited for. But it's a great set of musicians improvising to this new ideology that Bill Evans, who he hired from George Russell, knew how to kind of teach everyone. And it's about scales, it's about different sharps and flats, it's about not really having chords and having a set melodic format. It's about saying we're going to play within this scale, this mode, as it were, and we're going to just look for melodic phrasing of our own invention as we go forward. Hopefully we'll kind of inspire each other. And the whole record deals with these kind of melancholic themes. Blue and Green is fantastic. Freddie Freeloader is one of my favorite songs ever. Flamenco Sketches is a wonderful. I mean, it's Balearic and it's just wonderful, and it's Ibiza, Mallorca kind of feel to it. All blues, fantastic, and of course the title track. So what? It's it's all iconic material. As a guy who's been playing lounges and DJ sets in restaurants for brunches and doing all kinds of different things, kind of blues is a very ubiquitous thing, and it's familiar to most everyone. Even if they're not jazz fans, you kind of get immersed in kind of blue through film, maybe television, somewhat being shopping in bookstores. It's just a very omnipresent thing, kind of like Brubeck's Time Out, where Take Five, you just hear it so much without even knowing what it is that it's instantly familiar to you. And familiar is often one of the linchpins of loving something. There's times you're introduced to a song or a movie or a TV show or even a place, and there's a strange familiarity to it that you can't pinpoint, and it may come from any one of numerous sources. But there's a familiarity to it that makes it comfortable, and therefore we can kind of you may not have recognized this band, but you've heard that song enough somewhere that when you heard the band, you're like, oh, I like these guys. It's like instant. New York. For those of you who have been watching films made in America the last 40 years, New York is really present in a lot of filmmaking, and it makes a lot of the landmarks, a lot of the bridges, a lot of the sites very familiar to us, even though we've never been. And so you can be in New York and almost have this deja vu kind of experience of, oh, I recognize, I know this, I'm comfortable here. And it's pretty unique to New York. None of the other American urban landscapes have, or LA has that, but LA's skyline is very limited. And there's this one particular bridge that they use for films in LA that's not really a part of the highway system. And that's the same iconic shot in so much of LA that it's not really a bridge you can even really drive on. It's like it's meant for filmmaking. But you see it in rap videos, pop videos, films. It's really omnipresent. But it's kind of the one shot of LA you always see. And there's landmarks in LA, no question, that you see in film quite a bit. The Hollywood sign, for example. But New York is just filled with buildings that will be strangely familiar, even though you've never been. And kind of blue has that same power. It's just something that's so omnipresent in culture that the first time you sit down and listen to it, it's going to seem like an old friend. And that's part of its charm. And that's part of its accessibility. And the fact that it's used in so many disparate ways speaks to how accessible it is. It's one of the true masterpieces of jazz in the late 50s. It's some of the greatest talent in the music, making a record that's kind of effortless. It doesn't feel super thought out. It doesn't feel like it's trying to reinvent the wheel, even though it's being fairly inventive. And a lot of times innovation is only as successful as it is useful or applicable or enjoyable. I said before, putting a fifth wheel on the top of a car, you invented something, you're innovative, but what good is it? It's got to have purpose and meaning and belong and have a sense of purpose to it. And kind of blue, even though it is creative and inventive and popularizing something that no one else has really popularized as of that point, it's still very much a listenable experience, filled with all kinds of chances to be contemplative and introspective, and it's just a delight. It truly is. I've seen collectors out there with a dozen copies of this record, which I've never quite understood that. Even though there's lots of different versions of it, they're all going to be, for the most part, the same thing. But it's a record you never really tire of either, because of how it's the nature of the songs. They're just kind of bucolic and meditative. And so it doesn't beat you over the head. You can kind of just all of a sudden realize, oh yeah, I'm 5 minutes deep into this and I'm just kind of gliding along with it. It's, again, one of the high points in jazz. And people try to diminish it at times, I think, being almost too cool for kind of blue. And that's one of the sillier notions I could ever imagine. It's an absolute essential piece to the jazz canon, and it's something that if a person collects records but doesn't collect jazz, if they have one jazz record, the chances are it's going to be that. You know, it's a good bet. There's a few other records that you might put in that mix as the one record someone might have by a jazz guy. But Kind of Blue is kind of a pretty safe assumption that that's the one record they're going to have access and fell in love with. And part of the issue is I think people do fall in love with Kind of Blue, and then they're looking for that next jazz record. And this is where I think people get led astray a lot. Jazz collectors especially, they want to recommend that deep, dark, avant-garde, free jazz piece to let everyone know how cool they are. And so someone says, I really love Kind of Blue. What should I buy next? Oh, well, then you need Coltrane's A Love Supreme, which to a jazz guy, that might not seem that far out, but it's kind of out for some people. Oh, you like Kind of Blue? Well, I'm a jazz guy. If you love that, you need to check out Archie Shepp New Thing at Newport. That's real jazz. And that kind of talk, I think, is so responsible for so many people only having Kind of Blue. Because they go out and they buy that next jazz thing that someone told them they had to have. And it sounds nothing like Kind of Blue. I told you I like Kind of Blue. Why would you suggest something a light year away from it? And it's the absurdity of jazz collectors, a lot of them. They're just, I don't understand it. It speaks something about personality and how we want to be seen. And let's just be honest. We want people to see us as being the coolest, hippest intellectual. I know so much about it. So let me tell you something that's so obscure and random. And all my jazz fans are going to be like, wow, you made them buy that? But the person who bought it's not going to like it. Love Supreme is a maybe for most people. It's a pretty intense exercise. And it's certainly not accessible like, say, John Coltrane's My Favorite Things. Or ballads. Or Ellington. You know? There's just a lot of choices, I think. And if someone loves Kind of Blue, there's Time Out. Brubeck would be a great place to go from there. That'll give you that same sense of coolness and hipness and wonderment. I can't really say anything more about Kind of Blue at this point. It's been spoken to death. But it's certainly a legendary piece. And it's kind of the linchpin of the whole Miles Davis catalog. It's outsold most of the jazz canon by itself. You know what I mean? It's a real singular piece in that way. And it even really stands out in Miles' catalog. What he's doing before this record is very much hard bop and aggressive and up-tempo and full force. And then where he goes after this is through myriad changes and adaptations and grafting European sounds, sketches of Spain, which is, you know, it's a hybrid record. It's not really a jazz record. Into his second quintet, which is a whole different labyrinth of sound. This is a singular moment for Miles where he's just kind of in the G spot. And the band behind him is perfect for this moment. So it's really Miles' signature piece. It's a signature jazz piece. It's certainly fitting for being the record that most people don't know Miles Davis for. And so we're going to leave it at that today. If you love the channel, subscribe, hit that like, that thumbs up. And so if you want to help support the channel, go to Patreon and pledge a few dollars a month. Buy some merchandise from the merch store. It's always appreciated. Shout out to the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues and jazz share a lot in common. They were similar footsteps for the African American man coming up in this country. You know, so it's a story all in and of itself. And the integration of music, the integration of sport, they share a very common thread, and they can be woven into a narrative together. Absolutely. Anyway, I'll be safe. Talk to you soon. Peace.